My name is Jolene Whitaker. I'm 36 years old. 8 months ago, my parents organized a family portrait session to celebrate my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. 43 people, 3 generations, a rented event space in Chattanooga with catered appetizers, and a professional photographer my mother had found through a referral and booked without asking her name. I drove 2 hours to be there. I pressed my dress. I showed up early to help arrange the tables. When it came time for the immediate family grouping, grandparents, their children, their grandchildren, my father looked at the photographer and gestured across the room at me and said, with the specific casualness of someone who has rehearsed a cruelty until it no longer feels like one, "You can leave her out. We don't claim her." 43 people heard him say it. The photographer lowered her camera. She looked at my father for a moment. Then she looked at me. Then she said in the most even voice I have ever heard from a stranger, "I'm sorry, could you tell me who actually booked this session?" My mother said she had. The photographer said, "And you are?" My mother gave her name. The photographer pulled out her phone, opened her booking confirmation and said, "I show the deposit was paid by Jolene Whitaker. She's listed as the client of record for this session." I had paid for the photographer. My mother had forgotten that part. The room was very quiet. Before I tell you what happened next, please like and subscribe, but only if this story is reaching something real in you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I truly love hearing from you. Let me take you back. Because my father did not arrive at "we don't claim her" in a single afternoon. He built toward it over 36 years, one dismissal at a time. And I stood there and absorbed every one of them, because I did not yet understand that I was allowed to put the camera down and walk out of the frame entirely. Growing up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, I learned early that my father's love was a conditional document with terms that shifted without notice. The baseline condition, the one that never changed, was that I was not what he had expected. He had wanted a son. He got me. He spent the next 3 decades making sure I understood the difference between what he'd wanted and what he'd received. Not through cruelty exactly, but through a steady, patient indifference that communicated the same thing indifference always communicates: that what you are is less interesting than what someone else could have been. My family, plainly. Dad was a former high school football coach turned insurance adjuster who organized his entire emotional life around a masculinity so rigid it had no room in it for daughters who read too much and asked too many questions. Mom was a gentlewoman who loved me genuinely, but had long ago made the calculation that keeping peace with my father was the condition under which everything else in the household functioned. She was not a cruel person. She was a person who had decided very early that survival required a certain amount of looking away. My younger brother Cody arrived when I was 4 and immediately became the person my father had been waiting for. I was the placeholder. Cody was the point. That was never said directly. It didn't need to be. When I was 10, my school held a science fair and I built a working water filtration system out of materials I'd researched and assembled myself over 3 weeks. I had read about water filtration in a library book and drawn up my own design and tested it 4 times before I was satisfied with the result. I won first place. The prize was a small trophy and a write-up in the local paper with my photograph. My father looked at the newspaper, set it down on the counter and said, "Cody, you see that? That's what happens when you actually try." He said it to my brother, about my achievement, as though I were a teaching tool rather than the child who had won. I stood in the kitchen and smiled and said nothing. I did not know yet that saying nothing was a habit I was practicing into permanence. I told myself he was proud in his way. I kept building filtration systems, metaphorically speaking, for the next 26 years. At 17, I was accepted into the University of Tennessee's honors program on a partial merit scholarship. I had a 4.1 GPA, 2 AP credits, and a letter of recommendation from my English teacher that she told me was the best she'd written in 20 years of teaching. I remember reading that letter in her classroom after school and feeling, briefly, that someone had seen exactly who I was, my actual self. Not the placeholder version, not the daughter who wasn't a son. I kept a copy of that letter in a folder in my room for years. My father's response, at dinner the night I told them, was to ask whether the scholarship covered room and board, because he wasn't in a position to be supporting an English degree. He did not ask about the honors program. He did not ask about the scholarship amount or what I'd be studying or what I hoped to do with it. He asked about cost, and when I confirmed there would be some, the conversation ended there and moved on to something else entirely. He did not ask about the honors program. He did not ask about the scholarship amount. He did not ask what I wanted to study or what I hoped to do with it. He asked about costs, and when I confirmed there would be some, the conversation ended there. Cody was 15 and already being talked about at that same dinner table in terms of which football programs might be interested in him. That conversation my father had started himself, without prompting, with genuine enthusiasm. Nobody had asked him to. I took out loans for the parts the scholarship didn't cover. I worked part-time through all 4 years. I graduated with honors and paid down my debt within 5 years on an entry-level salary, because I had learned before I was old enough to vote that waiting for my father to come through was a strategy with a 0% return rate. I told myself I was self-sufficient. I was. I just didn't know yet that self-sufficiency should have been a choice rather than a survival response. The pattern continued and deepened as I got older, the way these patterns do when nobody names them. At family gatherings, my father talked about Cody's career, his girlfriend, his truck, his fantasy football standings, as though Cody's ordinary life were a series of things worth narrating in detail. When someone asked about me, my father would say something brief and redirecting. Jolene does something with marketing, or Jolene's fine, she keeps to herself, and turn the conversation back towards something he found more interesting. I was 31 when I started my own marketing consultancy. Small at first, then not small. Within 2 years, I had 6 retained clients and a revenue stream that had crossed $200,000 annually. I told my parents at Thanksgiving, at the same table where my father had dismissed the honor scholarship 16 years earlier. My mother said she was proud. My father said he hoped I had a backup plan. Cody had been working the same warehouse job for 4 years. My father had never once suggested he needed a backup plan. By the time I was 34, I had 12 clients, 2 employees, and an office I leased in a building downtown. The business had grown the way things grow when you put your whole attention into them, steadily, on merit, without anyone handing you anything. I had built it around a skill my father had once called a hobby, which I had thought about more than once while invoicing a client at 2 a.m. I had also, without fully deciding to, become the person in the family who quietly handled things, who remembered dates and organized occasions, who noticed when my grandparents needed help and arranged for it before anyone else thought to ask, who researched assisted living options when the conversation about my grandfather's mobility became unavoidable and nobody else wanted to sit with the paperwork. I did these things without announcement and without expectation of credit, which meant they were done and forgotten and done again, a cycle that had been running so long it had stopped feeling like a pattern and started feeling like just the shape of my role in that family. And when my grandmother mentioned in passing that she wished there were professional photographs of the whole family together, I said I would take care of it. I found the photographer myself. Her name was Dara Singh. She ran Singh Portrait Studio out of Nashville and came highly reviewed for large family sessions. I spoke with her on the phone for 40 minutes, explained the scope, and paid the deposit, $1,400, from my own account. I coordinated the venue, the date, the catering, the setup. I sent the family a group message with details 3 weeks in advance and personally called my grandparents to make sure they had everything they needed. I did all of this without being asked, because that was what I did. That was what I had always done. I had been the one who handled things for so long that handling things had stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like just the shape of how I moved through the world. I showed up. I organized. I paid. I made sure the good shoes were located and the grandparents had transportation, and the date was clear in everyone's calendars. And then I drove 2 hours, pressed my dress, showed up early, and stood in a room full of my family while my father told the photographer we don't claim her. Here is what happened after Dara established that I was the client of record. My father's expression moved through several phases. The first was surprise. He had genuinely not known, or had forgotten, or had simply never thought to ask who had organized the event he was standing inside of. The second was recalibration, the look of someone adjusting their posture when they realize the ground is different than expected. The third was something I had never seen on his face before, directed at me. Something close to uncertainty. My grandmother was the first person to speak. She is 73 years old, and she has spent 5 decades watching my father be exactly who he is, and I believe she had been waiting for a room like this one for a long time. She had been watching. She knew. She said, "Raymond, Jolene planned this entire evening. She paid for it. She called me 3 times to make sure I had my good shoes." A few people laughed, not unkindly, but the kind of laugh that releases something that has been sitting in the air too long. The kind that says, "Yes, that is exactly right, and we are glad someone said it." My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, who has known me my whole life, said, "Raymond, that was an awful thing to say." Not a question, a statement, flat and clear. My father said, "I was joking." Aunt Carol said, "No, you weren't." The room held that for a moment. Dara said nothing further. She simply waited, camera at her side, with the particular patience of someone who has worked enough family sessions to know that the best thing she could do was let the room finish what it had started without her involvement. I had not spoken since Dara confirmed my name. I had been standing still, letting the room do what rooms sometimes do when the truth gets into them. Expand, shift, rearrange itself around something that can no longer be ignored. But there was something I needed to say, and I said it then, quietly, to my father directly. I said, "I have been coming to these things my entire life. I have organized half of them. I paid for this one, and I would like to be in the photographs." My father looked at me for a long moment. He is not a man who apologizes, and he did not apologize then. But he looked at me in a way he had not looked at me before. Like I had dimension he hadn't accounted for. Like I had taken up space in a way that surprised him. He said, "Fine." It was not an apology. It was not even an acknowledgement of what had been said. But it was a different word than, "We don't claim her." And sometimes different is what you have to start with. We took the photographs. I am in all of them. After the formal session, while people were eating and the evening loosened into something more relaxed, my cousin Brianna found me near the appetizer table. Brianna is 28, Aunt Carol's youngest. Easy to talk to in the way that younger cousins sometimes are, unencumbered by the particular histories that complicate honesty between people who've known each other too long. She said, "That was brave." I said, "I just asked to be in the pictures." She said, "Yeah, but in your family that's brave." She wasn't wrong. I found Dara at the end of the evening while she was packing her equipment into a canvas bag by the door, methodical and unhurried, like someone who had been doing this long enough to have a system for everything. I apologized for the disruption. She looked at me for a moment, not the careful look of someone being diplomatic, but the direct look of someone who had already decided what she thought. She said, "Don't apologize to me. You hired me to document your family. I documented your family. That's the job." Then she said, "For what it's worth, the shots from tonight are going to be beautiful. The light in here was good and the emotion was real. Those are the 2 things you can't manufacture. I'll make sure you have your own set." She did. I received them 6 weeks later. There is one photograph in particular, the full family grouping, 3 generations, my grandparents in the center, where I am standing at the edge of the frame next to my grandmother, and she has her hand on my arm, and we are both looking at the camera, and I look like exactly what I am, a member of this family. I had that photograph printed and framed. It sits on my desk at the office now, between my monitor and my coffee mug, where I see it every morning. My 2 employees have asked about it. I tell them it's my family. I don't tell the whole story unless they ask, and when they ask, I tell it the way I'm telling it now. Not with bitterness, not with performance, but with the clarity of someone who has decided the truth is not something she needs to protect anyone from anymore. My father and I have not had a direct conversation about what he said. I did not demand one. Some confrontations announce themselves publicly, in front of 43 witnesses, and the aftermath is a slower, quieter negotiation that happens over months in the ordinary texture of family life. He called on my birthday this year. He said happy birthday and asked how work was going. I told him work was going well. He said good. We talked for 4 minutes. It was 4 more minutes than we'd ever really talked before. I'll take it. My mother called me the week after the portrait session and said she was sorry. She said she should have said something in the room and she hadn't, and she was ashamed of that. It was the most honest conversation we've had in years, maybe ever. I told her I heard her. I told her what I needed going forward was not protection after the fact, but presence in the moment. She said she understood. I believe she is trying, in the particular way of people who have spent decades not trying and are learning what that costs. Cody texted me a photo of the family portraits when Dara sent the full gallery. He said they turned out great. He said I looked nice. I texted back thank you. We are not close and may not become close, but we are standing in the same photographs now. And that is something. My grandmother called me to say the photographs were the best gift anyone had given her in years. That phone call lasted 45 minutes. We talked about her garden, my business, a book she'd been reading, a trip she wanted to take before her knees made traveling impossible. We talked the way I have always wanted to talk with my family, easily, without performance, without the need to manage anyone's comfort at the expense of my own presence. Without the particular exhaustion of being in a room where you are simultaneously present and unclaimed. It was the longest, uninterrupted conversation I had ever had with my grandmother, and I kept thinking during it, this is what it was supposed to feel like the whole time. This is what I was always showing up for. I paid $1,400 for a photographer and got 43 witnesses and a grandmother who held my arm in the frame. That is the best investment I have ever made. If you are someone who has been spending your whole life organizing rooms you're excluded from, planning the dinners you're talked over at, paying for occasions where your presence is treated as optional, I want you to hear this. Keep your receipts. Not as evidence, not as ammunition, but as the record of your own presence. The proof that you were there, that you showed up, that you paid the deposit and drove 2 hours and pressed your dress. You were there. The photographs will show it. And if someone tries to leave you out of the frame, sometimes all you have to do is stay in it and let the room figure out the rest. Please like and subscribe if this found you when you needed it. Leave me a comment. Tell me if you've ever been made to feel like a guest in your own family. Tell me if you've ever watched a room receive the truth and then decide what to do with it. I'll be reading every one. My name is Jolene Whitaker. I'm 36 years old. I'm in every photograph. My grandmother's hand is on my arm, and the deposit receipt has my name on it. Nothing else needs to be said.